we've been able to pull this kind of core thesis that people feel like climate change is an urgent problem, but they feel powerless to do anything about it. And it feels like this big kind of intangible, faraway problem, but really it is actually an everyday challenge that requires these kind of micro changes. Climatize, it's an easy and transparent platform for investing directly in renewable energy projects. So cutting out all the noise, all the greenwashing, and enabling you to actually invest in clean energy projects in your community and around the country. And, we have really seen this kind of growing demand for really transparent ways for people to feel like they're playing a role in the energy transition. And the real kind of aha moment for us was after joining the global climate strikes back in 2019 in Barcelona, where there was 100,000 people protesting in the streets. And, it was this incredible turnout of hope and motivation, people of all generations, all backgrounds. And yet I was struck by this kind of sad realization that we were all going to go home. And the next day, nothing was going to be different. And in that moment, I felt like, wow, if we have 100,000 people here and our best option is to make a cardboard sign, that is a glaring problem. Mm-hmm. And, I think this is equally relevant today as we're having this conversation. There's New York Climate Week going on, and just on Monday there were tens of thousands of people in the streets protesting for climate action. Yeah. And so this momentum is really building, but we need to actually create a way that enables the everyday person to feel like an active stakeholder rather than a neutral bystander in the energy transition. Yeah. And so that's really Climatize's key goal here, is to provide a seat at the table where everyday people can have an accessible way to investing in these projects and really feeling that kind of self-determination that they are not only earning a really attractive return on these projects, but helping kind of build clean energy and kind of building the future that they want to see.
I mean, I think it's such a great thing because I do think we all feel challenged by this as humans. I think we, to varying degrees, feel like, okay, how do I make an impact? I just feel like I'm just one person. And so you're giving them a platform where they can actually do something about it and surface these projects. And I think, of course, if you look at the different bodies that are driving change, like you got government, business, and overall just the masses. I think the challenge, of course, with government is always they're pretty short-sighted. I'm very bullish on a lot of the changes that are happening. The old infrastructure bill, these are all very positive things. But I think you need more public pressure. If you look at history in the U.S., the things that drove change, you had a lot of public pressure, whether it's the women's right to vote or, the ending slavery. Like there's a lot of things where you needed the public to get out there and really kind of create that pressure for government to act. And so I think we got to move on all fronts when it comes to climate, because there's always this, how can I make an impact, or this one thing's not going to matter. The answer is you should just say yes and just can it for everything. And then that's how you're driving a lot of change. And so it's great that you saw that there and you realized like, oh, well now what? Right. Because, they're there. You protest often when you just feel hopeless, right? You don't know what else to do. And so that was an interesting spark, I think, for you to go do this. And did you immediately, with you and your co-founder, after that event, was that kind of, I'm assuming there's many conversations where it's like, well, what do we do with this?
Yeah. So, you touch on a couple of key points. So really, after seeing that climate protest, we were off to the races. I actually keep a journal of all of my notes from the business, and I'm 4 journals deep, 550 something pages later. But the first day we sat down was 3 days later after that strike, and I still have this kind of continuity of the work since then. And really, you kind of touch upon a really key point there that, we interviewed 250 people from those strikes after, having this kind of realization. And from that, we've been able to pull this kind of core thesis that people feel like climate change is an urgent problem, but they feel powerless to do anything about it. Yeah. And that's because, to your point, it feels like this big kind of intangible, faraway problem, but really it is actually an everyday challenge that requires these kind of micro changes. And you bring up a really good point there that, it can feel like one small change doesn't really add to, the necessary kind of macro pivot that we need. But if I were to kind of put this in a different analogy, if I gave you $1, I don't think you would consider yourself rich. But if I kept putting down $1 every single day, eventually you would have enough worth sitting in front of you where you might actually go, okay, wow, that's actually a lot of money. Now I am actually rich, because wealth is simply just an accumulation of many single dollar. And so we actually, that was kind of part of this early ideation process of Climatize is, in seeing that many people, we kind of ran a back of the napkin calculation and said, okay, well, plenty of people have maybe a dollar and change kicking around their drawers. What would it be if we actually pooled that money together? And so we did that. We said, okay, from those 100,000 people in Barcelona that one day, if everybody pitched in a dollar, what would that be? It'd be $100,000. If you did it for a year, that'd be $36.5 million. And you could actually build a decent amount of solar projects with that. And then if you scaled that, there were hundreds of cities and 7.6 million people who showed up for those strikes. If those 7.6 million people each pitched in that dollar per day for a year, that would be over $2.75 billion per year. That's actually then a very meaningful pool of capital that you can actually build a lot of clean energy projects with. Yeah. And so it is tempting to pursue those big checks, and frankly, they do move the needle very quickly. But the reality is that there is actually a very big pool of individuals that want to put their capital to this. And we have found that kind of still the overall climate education and conversation is developing. The zeitgeist is shifting. That cultural movement is there. 5 years ago, if we had had this conversation and I told you, hey, every car commercial in the Super Bowl is going to be EVs, you would have thought I was crazy. But nowadays, that's pretty normalized.
A million EVs, by the way, a million EVs in the last 12 months. It took 10 years to create the first million. I think 2 years for the second million. And then the last year we had 1 million. So you look at that bell curve of EVs. It's incredible. Anyhow.